I had the coolest job that any electrical engineer could ever have on the ground crew for Solar Impulse 2, the first solar-powered airplane to fly around the world only using the power of the sun. IEEE USA has given me a competitive edge because of their support system. It is so much easier doing something and being out of your comfort zone when you have someone there saying, "You got this." IEEE USA is more than just a network, it's a family.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aline McNall, and I'm a Senior Legislative Representative in the DC office of IEEE USA, and I'll be doing our legislative update this afternoon. Thank you for joining us, and feel free to ask questions in the chat, and I will get to those as soon as the presentation is done. So as a quick update, September 30th, the House passed the Senate's amendment to HR 6833, which is basically a way of saying that there's a stopgap funding measure that extends all of the federal funding through December 16th. So this includes the Commerce, Justice, and Science Appropriations Bill, so NIST and NSF and NASA are all in there, the Defense Appropriations Bill, and the Energy Appropriations Bill. So there's not any significant changes to those because it is a continuing resolution. There are of course some extra. There's of course some extra funding for Ukraine in that supplemental, but otherwise the funding levels are consistent through December 16th at the moment, and they are currently negotiating a omnibus package. Currently, the Florida senators, though, are putting together a funding package for disaster relief, so that negotiation and those conversations will probably take a little bit of precedence over the conversations about an omnibus bill coming up. Congressional leaders do hope to pass an omnibus package, and then the fiscal year that recently begun would be included in that omnibus package. Currently, the debate kind of holding up those discussions involves the parity between defense funding and non-defense funding. So in general, we've had some parity where defense and non-defense funding are treated equally. And in general, the Republicans led by Senator Shelby here, I put in the quote of parity might not be enough. And so Republicans are really pushing for some more defense spending. So that debate over how much to spend in defense versus non-defense is of course ongoing. And IEEE looks forward to working with Congress on the research kind of funding issues that are part of that, both in the defense area as well as the non-defense area. So the Senate has actually begun floor debates for this year's defense reauthorization bill. There are currently 900 amendments, actually over 900 amendments. So this debate will be ongoing, and the Senate will likely complete it after the election. And then they will confer with the House, and there will be a conference package for the National Defense Authorization Act. So the House, again, passed their NDAA, their National Defense Reauthorization Act, in July. Some issues that were highlighted in terms of the S&T space include electric vehicle charging stations at commissary stores and military exchanges. Some of the R&D issues involve biomanufacturing, chemical security, software data protection, supply chains, of course, and digital interoperability, as well as there's a lot in climate change in that bill. There's an authorization of a 20% increase in basic research funding in that one, and then strong investments in, of course, the National Security Innovation Network. So that was the House passed bill, and then the Senate is currently, of course, debating the over 900 amendments to their defense reauthorization. So some amendments that IEEE is focused on and is looking into in particular include the exemption from numerical visa caps for students who earn graduate degrees in certain STEM fields. So this was a high-skilled STEM immigration amendment introduced by Senators Durbin and Rounds. So IEEE is looking into that one, as well as research security amendment introduced by Senator Portman and Peters. There's also the launch of a nuclear fuel security initiative by Senators Manchin and Barrasso, and the wildfire preparedness and weather monitoring amendment by Senators Cantwell and Wicker. So these are just some of the STEM provisions and the STEM amendments in the Senate discussions. But these are kind of our areas of focus for the moment in terms of the Defense Reauthorization Bill. For those of you who have listened into other legislative updates, we've been talking about the CHIPS Act for years, and it was, of course, passed into law. So now the discussion becomes, what about the implementation of CHIPS? What are we doing in terms of authorizing huge increases in programs at NIST? Can Congress appropriate the funding, not only at NIST, but also at NSF and within the Department of Energy? These authorizations were part of the CHIPS Act, and then the CHIPS Act appropriated $52.7 billion for manufacturing grants and research investments in semiconductors. And so those two pots of money are actually different, and IEEE is hoping that Congress will, appropriators in Congress will appropriate the levels of funding in the CHIPS Act for the research agencies so that they can do the things that they're tasked with. Other questions that have come up in the recent debates about chips, or the discussions, I should say, are in terms of the U.S. semiconductor manufacturing capacity. So that obviously had decreased by 37% in 1990 to 12% today. So IEEE is looking at obviously helping the industry now reinvigorate that sector. So how can we reverse the trend of this semiconductor manufacturing, and how can we use the CHIPS Act to rebuild this manufacturing sector? How can we ensure that the $10 billion in the CHIPS Act set aside for the tech hubs can then be used throughout the country to bolster U.S. innovation? So these are some of the questions that we're looking at. The bill, of course, was a huge win for the science and technology policy community. And so we are looking at kind of its implementation for the foreseeable future at the moment. STEM agency COVID response. So I haven't actually talked about COVID in a little while for these legislative updates, but I wanted to kind of touch base on some of the things that the different STEM agencies are doing with respect to the U.S. COVID response. So the GAO is actually currently urging the Department of Homeland Security to strengthen cybersecurity for telehealth. Since so many people started using telehealth services, now the questions of cybersecurity have certainly come up. And the GAO is looking to have the Homeland Security strengthen those. The Department of Energy had established a national virtual biotechnology lab in March of 2020. So this is kind of a combination of the DOE national labs using things like the light sources and the neutron sources, but also the nanoscale centers and the biocharacterization facilities and the other facilities to focus on COVID issues. The DOE is also looking at high performance computing facilities and how those can be used to respond to the COVID challenge. Including epidemiology and logistical concerns and other kind of issues that relate to medical devices, but also just the COVID response in general. So I did want to highlight those and to say that we are certainly working with the administration and looking at ways to address the COVID challenge, but also looking at the ways that in particular these STEM agencies are doing so. NIST, for example, recently awarded some SBIR grants to small businesses, and so I wanted to highlight those. So $3.2 million to help 4 small businesses focus on technical response to the coronavirus, as well as $4 million to help 19 businesses develop advanced technology, manufacturing, and then privacy for medical diagnostics. A little update on the Department of Labor issues that I've brought up in the past. So in January of 2020, California implemented new criteria for classifying individuals as consultants. This new test is referred to as the ABC test and has proved challenging to the consultant community of IEEE members in particular in California. The Department of Labor did release a notice of proposed rulemaking and is accepting comments from stakeholders through November 28th on that notice of proposed rulemaking. Russ Harrison has been following that issue closely in our office, and he's going to be doing an update through a webinar on Thursday, October 20th at 1 p.m. So feel free to register for that webinar, and the link will be in the chat, but I wanted to include it in the slides as well. So if any of you have any questions, we're happy to answer those, particularly during that webinar, but I can see if I can answer your questions now as well, should you have any at the end of this legislative update. I wanted to flag that the White House did release a blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights. So this includes 5 principles associated with the practice of helping guide the design, use, and deployment of automated systems in terms of protecting the American public. That is, of course, the goal there. So things that they're considering include safe and effective systems, the algorithmic discrimination protections, data privacy, notice and explanations, and then human alternatives, considerations, and fallbacks. IEEE did release a report in September of 2022, which I wanted to flag. So this is the Trustworthy Evidence for Trustworthy Technology report. It provides an overview of evidence for assessing the trustworthiness of autonomous and intelligent systems, a framework for ethics, informed trust, and evidence, legal historical background and trust in terms of trustworthy evidence, and evidence supporting informed trust, highlighting the IEEE standard 1012, which is verification and validation of software. So that report is available on our website, should any of you wish to read it. One highlight again in artificial intelligence space is S2551 will be signed into law in the coming weeks. S2551 is the Artificial Intelligence Training for the Acquisition Workforce Act. It requires that OMB establish a training program providing AI training to federal procurement officers. The training will focus on the privacy risks of AI. So it's aimed at the federal workforce, but it is established a training program to look at AI issues, and that will be signed into law soon. Highlighting again IEEE activities, I wanted to flag for those of you interested in applying for our fellowship program. So IEEE-USA does have a government fellows program. This includes the State Department, it includes USAID, the Agency for International Development, and it includes congressional fellows. So for any of you who are interested in kind of transitioning into the policy world or dipping your toe in, these fellowships are a really good way to do that. I did want to flag that the application deadline for IEEE's fellowship program is December 9th at 12 p.m. Eastern. So the link will be in the chat for any of you who are interested in applying, and there's a lot of information on our website about this program. Some past fellows have done some really interesting things that I kind of wanted to highlight in terms of some of the questions and issues that they've looked at. Anything from the negotiations of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline in Europe to looking at other energy issues within the State Department's Office of Energy Resources. We've had fellows look at biology and bioengineering issues, particularly as it relates to disease, but also other kind of biology issues internationally. We've had folks look at certain conflicts, so issues relating to cybersecurity. There's, of course, questions about internet access for certain countries at the moment. So these are the sorts of kind of policy questions that are debated within the federal government, and IEEE does place fellows within the agencies to help address and look at the technical side of some of these policy questions. So for any of you who are interested, we do ask that you either have a PhD or 5 years after a master's of professional experience, but I would encourage any of you who are interested in checking out our website and applying to the program. So that really concludes our legislative update. Congress is basically out getting reelected at the moment. So I'm happy to answer any questions about any of these issues that have been discussed today, but also if any of you have questions about the election or something like that, I'm happy to discuss that as well. Okay. So the question came in, can you comment on the impact of federal research becoming open access? The White House is certainly pushing open access, and IEEE has been involved in those debates and discussions. The agencies are focused on looking at making the research data accessible to as many folks as possible. In terms of the impact of the recent kind of decisions on open access, I don't think I haven't personally heard of our members being impacted quite yet, but there have been some changes, obviously, in the administration within the open access issue area. And so I'm happy to keep you all updated in that space. In terms of IEEE publications and the lack of peer review for open access, those are issues. So far, I don't think there have been any internal changes in terms of IEEE's process, but happy to keep you all updated about the open access issue. And as things do change, certainly mention them here. Well, seeing no more questions, I think I'll close today's legislative update. The next one will be October 27th, 2022. And that's a little typo there. And I look forward to answering your questions online or seeing you all at that next legislative update. Thank you so much. Have a good afternoon.